Today's video is brought to you by Tomplay. We'll hear more from them in a little while. Do we actually need to learn music theory? Is it really worth your time to deal with this mess? After all, this is music, it's all about the sound. Who cares about some mumbo-jumbo a theory professor writes down in a textbook? Well, here's a clip of a wildly successful musician that believes the answer is absolutely no. In fact, he believes that it's detrimental.
I'm not into musicianship at all. I don't have any respect for it. I just hate it. You know, to learn how to read music or to understand arpeggios and Dorian modes and all that stuff is just a waste of time. It just, you know, it gets in the way of originality.
Most of you should know who that is, but just in case you don't, that is Kurt Cobain, the lead singer, guitarist, and primary songwriter of the band Nirvana. Nirvana was a grunge band in the early 90s that was extremely influential. Their most popular album, Nevermind, has sold 30 million copies worldwide and still to this day gets nearly 34 million streams a month on Spotify alone. So I mean, that kind of answers the question right there. Based off what Kurt said, he couldn't read music, he had no traditional theory training, and he had no interest or respect for it. And to be honest, it's difficult to argue with results, especially results of this magnitude. So no, objectively, you do not need to learn traditional Western music theory to be a successful musician, at least in the context of bands across genres that are similar to Nirvana. But if Kurt didn't know or use any music theory, how did he write his music? Did he randomly pick notes out of a hat until he found the one he liked? Of course not. He used his ear. He wrote what sounded good to him and what his ear wanted to hear. But believe it or not, he used many traditions of Western harmony that has been described by music theory for centuries, even if he didn't know it. Let me show you what I mean. The song Lithium has always been one of my favorite Nirvana songs. The combination of the harmony with the lyrics is really something special in my opinion. The song is in the key of D major and starts on a D major chord. It then moves to the 3 chord F minor, to the 6 chord B minor, and then the 4 chord G major. Here's all the triads in D major. You can see that these first 4 chords are all sturdily rooted in this key. Some of these harmonies are implied because most of these chords actually have no third, but you can tell the key anyway based on the roots. But then we get something interesting. The next 4 chords don't appear on this D major chart. We first get a B flat major, then a C major, followed by an A minor, and then another C major. And that is because they are a textbook example of mode mixture, which is a pretty advanced harmonic concept. Mode mixture, or modal interchange, as it is sometimes called, is when you are in one mode and you borrow chords from another mode with the same root. So these chords do not appear in D major, but they do appear in D minor, as you can see here. The first 4 chords depict a different emotional state than the second 4. And if you look at the lyrics of the song, you can see why. The first 4 chords are in the key of D major, and the lyrics are, "I'm so happy 'cause today." Then things take a darker turn in the second half of the phrase, "He's found his friends, but they're in his head." There is emotional dissonance between these 2 subphrases, and the harmony fits it perfectly. And throughout the song, there seems to be a constant back and forth from positive to negative emotions. I think it's fair to say that Kurt wouldn't have known the textbook definition of mode mixture, but his ear was able to recognize that the second 4 chords would produce a different emotional state than the first 4. And thus, he came to the same conclusion with his ear alone that many composers throughout the century have come to with a combination of their ears and theoretical knowledge. For example, here is a similar effect from a Schubert song written all the way back in 1823. In the third measure, we get a note that drastically changes the mood of the music. That C flat changes the harmony from A flat major, which we were previously in, to now A flat minor, which is reflected in the lyrics when they begin to talk about silence. These are very similar effects. One was gotten to with the ear alone, and the other with the ear and a theoretical approach. So composing with your ear and using music theory to aid you are not really all that different. 2 paths to the same place. So what I just did with the song Lithium is what music theory is really meant for. I think some people out there have a strange idea of what music theory really is. There is this idea that music theory is this set of laws that were invented centuries ago by some old guys that decided if you write music outside of these laws, then you are just wrong or stupid. And naturally, people are going to push against that because it sounds wildly arrogant. But that's not really what it is. Some elitists, I admit, probably do treat it that way, but that's not the point. The point is to describe music in a systematic and coherent way that can be easily communicated to other musicians. Just as the written word describes our spoken languages, music theory describes the sounds and techniques of music and how they work together. But an important thing to remember is that the practice almost always came before the theory. Essentially, the way it worked was, composer A does something that everyone likes and everyone wants to sound like them, and then the theory comes along and essentially gives a roadmap for writing music in that style, establishing the rules. Composer B takes those rules, follows them for a while until their own unique style and approach is cemented, and then decides to break a few of them to get the sound that they are looking for. Everyone decides that they like these new techniques, and those become the new rules, and this repeats on and on. Every new genre and generation of music since antiquity has tried something new and broke a few rules, and that's a good thing. That's what keeps music moving forward. But in order to think outside of the box, it really helps to know exactly what the box is in the first place, and music theory helps us do that tremendously. So yes, I think you should learn music theory even though it's not 100% necessary for success. And if you need some help learning all of the rules that you can one day break, I'd recommend checking out today's sponsor, Tomplay. Tomplay is an interactive sheet music library that allows you to play along with their extensive catalog of scores and recordings. With over 90,000 available arrangements and backing tracks, all categorized by difficulty and style for all of these instruments. Tomplay is an excellent resource for both learning and practicing music. Select your tempo, hit the record button, and play along. Listen back and annotate your score with fingerings or notes on where to improve. If you get stuck, try using the visualization tool to give you ideas for fingerings and technique execution. And now, new to Tomplay is their music theory course called Tom Theory. Tom Theory is a comprehensive, progressive music theory course designed by Angelo Lombardo, teacher and dean of Lausanne Conservatory. This course contains rhythm and sight reading exercises as well as a selection of musical repertoire, allowing students to make the link between playing an instrument and music theory, progressing up from the very basics to some pretty advanced stuff. Recently, I've been reviewing all of the C clef exercises across all 8 levels, because between you and me, my alto and tenor clef chops are not where they used to be. So, if you play any of these instruments or are interested in leveling up your music theory skills, follow my link in the description and go check out Tomplay today. Thanks again to Tomplay for the sponsor, and now back to the video. So let's be clear about this. Why should you actually learn music theory? Being able to read and write in traditional notation may be outside the scope of what most people would consider music theory, but it is the backbone of it. Even if you don't know much about harmony, or forms, or orchestration, being able to read music will allow you to interpret and learn music from your fellow musicians at a much faster rate than learning by ear. Don't get me wrong, learning by ear is an amazing skill that should be developed consistently. But the amount of information that can be stored on the written page is just more than can be memorized, plain and simple. And it can also be organized pedagogically to help you learn as quickly as possible. Once you are fluent in reading on your instrument, you can learn music so quickly it starts to feel like a superpower. Now again, just as theory is not 100% necessary, neither is reading music. There are plenty of examples of great musicians that never learned to read music, and that's okay. My argument is that your life will get easier if you do learn to read, not that you are less of a musician if you can't. I just want to be really clear about that. Plus, being able to read and write music allows us to archive, organize, and save it forever to be learned from by future generations. Once you get past the initial hurdle of being able to read music, you get to what people usually think of when you say music theory: chords, scales, keys, forms, instrumentation, etc. And this is where you can get really granular on analyzing the work of musicians of the past in order to learn from them. Being able to understand what composers and musicians have done in the past allows us to replicate their style and eventually build off of it. And this can be used to write your own music and create something new. Let's say I want to create something similar to Nirvana's Lithium, but in the style of that Schubert piece. How do I do that? Well, first it starts with an analysis of Lithium, both harmonically and melodically. We already did the harmony of the first phrase. The first 4 chords are in D major, and the second 4 are in D minor, which creates emotional turbulence between the 2 parts of the phrases. The flat 6 chord in particular sounds very alien, so we will definitely be using that. Now let's look at the melody, especially the place where we change from D major to D minor. Kurt emphasizes the third of the first B-flat major chord in the melody, which really hammers home the change of tonality, so we will be doing that as well. From Schubert, we'll take the Alberti bass, the instrumentation, and the general style. So this is what I came up with. Now, I know I'm no genius composer or songwriter, so this isn't exactly anything special, but all of the concepts are there. We start with 2 bars of the 1 chord, in this case A major, with a melody that is somewhat similar to a Mozart melody I heard a long time ago. I can't really remember the piece, honestly. But in bar 3, we introduce the first instance of mode mixture. A major becomes A minor, and the 3 of the new chord is emphasized on the downbeat in the melody, C natural. We hang out in A minor for 2 bars before mixing the mode again with F sharp minor. This chord belongs in A major, so it strikes the ear a little bit from A minor. And in the melody, I chose to emphasize the 5th of the chord, C sharp, because again, it strikes the ear because of the prominent C natural that we heard 2 bars earlier. In bar 6, I change up the direction of the melody to encircle the next shocking note, F natural, where we again mix up the mode with a flat 6 chord, F major, borrowed from the A minor scale. We then end the phrase with an E7 that belongs to both A minor and A major to make it ambiguous as to where we are going to finally end up. And then we end on A major. So I know this composition isn't going to go down in history, but because I was able to analyze both pieces, I took little parts from both and worked them into something of my own. And I was able to do it very quickly and get the idea I was looking for across. This piece I wrote can then be taken and improved or reworked into something special one day, either by me or by someone else. Feel free to steal this, by the way, if you have any use for it. But I was only able to do this because I was able to break down the ideas of both pieces theoretically. Doing this by ear would have been possible, but in my opinion, it would have been a lot more difficult and time-consuming. So are there any disadvantages to learning music theory? Well, this is anecdotal from my life, so take it with a grain of salt. First, I'd say, are there any disadvantages to being able to read music? No, at least not in my opinion. But when you really start to get into the weeds of harmony and tonality, it can sometimes be limiting depending on what you are trying to do. When I played in my metal band, we used to write all of our own music, but I was also in music school at the same time, getting traditional harmony shoved down my throat constantly. And this would sometimes lead to me being unable to think of ideas that weren't strictly in that theoretical box I was talking about earlier. I knew all the minor scales and Phrygian dominant modes that I could ever need to write death metal, and I could spit out riff after riff. But after a while, it all started to sound the same, and I remember really struggling trying to break out of that mold. One of the guitarists in the band was also in music school with me, and he had some similar problems, although I will definitely say he did the majority of the writing. I just helped. But we had another guitarist that was a good player, but he didn't know a single thing about music theory. He had learned everything that he knew from tabs and never learned to read music. But when the music needed something strange or outside of the box, this guy always had something good. Theoretically, a lot of it was nonsense, but it sounded good in that situation, so who cares? So I think that when Kurt Cobain says that it can get in the way of being creative, I think he might have a point. You could end up going down the same pathways over and over. However, with enough time and effort in the specific musical situation you are in, you can break through that. And even with this point, I feel that the benefits of music theory far outweigh the drawbacks. But let me know what you think in the comments. Did your life get easier after learning music theory, or did you experience any drawbacks? If you enjoyed, please leave a like, subscribe, and consider checking out my Patreon. Thanks again to Tomplay for sponsoring this video.